I'm here to give my predictions and speculations for The Walking Dead Season 5, Episode 12, titled Remember. And plus, I'm going to talk about why I think Rick hid Joe's pistol in that blender before he had arrived to the Alexandria safety zone. So let's get started with the video. Now for my predictions and speculations for this episode. Now, if you noticed in the sneak peek, once Rick and his group ends up going into the Alexandria safety zone, you see the gate closing. And you see Sasha takes her gun and she kills a zombie walking towards the Alexandria safety zone. Now, if you pay attention, as soon as they get into the community, the gate closed. But yet you don't see nobody closing the gate. So I'm assuming they have a electric gate that closes if you hit a switch. Now notice how in the sneak peek for this episode, you saw our characters from a distance, while the camera looked like it was filming from inside of an empty house. Now I predict and I speculate that we do have the Alexandria safety zone people that is located outside of the community in that empty house that we saw in the sneak peek. And I believe that they stay in an empty, raggedy house to guard it, to make sure ain't nobody trying to come through the gates of Alexandria safety zone. But also in that empty, abandoned looking house, I believe they have a switch in that house that they press to open the gates. And that's the reason when I saw our characters go inside the community, you saw how the gate just instantly closed behind them without Eric or anybody else closing the gates up. Because like I said, when we saw our characters in the sneak peek that was standing in front of Alexandria's safety, and we saw them from a distance while the camera was filming from inside of a house or looking out the empty windows of the house that was torn down. So I believe they do keep people on standby to guard the place, to stop, like I said, to stop anybody from getting into the community. But they also have a electric switch that makes the gates open. So I predict and speculate that somebody was in that house. That's how they was able to get in the community. And next, I think this episode will set a conflict up, or begin a conflict between Rick and Pete. Now remember, Pete's name was mentioned in the previous episode, episode 11, Distance. Remember when Noah had came in the RV, he was in the RV, and he brought Eric some pills and a bottle of water. And Eric asks Noah, what happened to your leg? And he tells Noah, but he don't really go in detail with it. And then Eric tells him, we have a special sergeant named Pete. Now, if you know about the comic books, you will know that Pete is a drunk and he abuses his wife and his kid. So I think that the conflict between Rick and Pete, or could be Daryl getting into the conflict with Pete, will begin in this episode, or it will set the conflict up between somebody in the Alexandria safety zone against Rick group. So I think there will be some conflict between the people already in the community, and conflict between, well, going on with Rick at that moment, once they get into it. Next, when you see the sneak peek and you see the preview for the next episode, you hear some dialogue coming from Rick, but you don't see him talking directly from his mouth. Now, I predict and I speculate that dialogue came from Rick actually meeting the owner of the Alexandria safety zone. Because remember, in the sneak preview, when we see Rick and his group go into the gates, he asks about it. And then Aaron, I think, tells him that Deanna can describe this place better than anybody. Now I think once they get there, they're going to be asked to give up their guns. But also in the process, they got to be interviewed. Because remember, Aaron said that he wanted them to audition, but he says, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean audition, because we have auditions on Friday nights talking about dancing and stuff. They got to be interviewed. So remember, Rick is going to get interviewed. And I think this is where the dialogue comes from. We hear him talking in the preview, but we don't see him talking. We hear him talking. I think once he get interviewed by Deanna, that's going to determine if they can stay in the Alexandria safety zone. Like I say, we hear him talking about all the stuff he had to go through and all the people he had to kill and why he had to kill them. So I think that Deanna is over the Alexandria safety zone. Now, Deanna could be a remixed character of Douglas Moore because Douglas Moore was the owner of the Alexandria safety zone in the comic book. He was a male. His name was Douglas Moore. But this time, you know how The Walking Dead like to switch situations up or switch certain things up from the comic books. Now, this time, Deanna could be the owner of the Alexandria safety zone. Or Douglas Moore did have a wife in the comic book, but her name wasn't Deanna. If I remember, her name wasn't Deanna. Now, or back to what I was saying, she could be Deanna Moore. She could be Douglas Moore's wife. Could be, but I highly doubt that. But like I said, she could be Deanna Moore, Douglas Moore's wife, and we could possibly get an introduction to Douglas Moore in this episode. Or like I said, the situations could be switched this time, and the owner of the Alexandria safety zone could be a female named Deanna, as Eric mentioned to Rick once they got into the gates. He said that Deanna can describe this place better to you than anybody can, because she knows the parts around it. She knows how this place works. Next in this episode, I believe that the writers are trying to add some type of suspense to this episode. That's the reason why in the sneak peeks they keep showing us Carl walking up to an empty closet door with a knife in his hand. I believe that there is nothing in those closet doors. That's just something they putting into the promos to hype the episode up. Because these people are just getting to a new community, so I don't think they're going to be in danger just yet. So I think that's just some material they put into there to hype the episode up. At the same time, they're showing us that our characters, our survivors that we have been with since season 1, are now weary about the place. I'm sorry if they're weary and they don't know what's going on, so they're keeping their guard up at all times. That's the reason why we see Carl with the knife in his hand walking up to the door. Don't necessarily mean something is in the house that he's in at that moment, because the house looked nice, clean, and clear. So I don't think nothing like that is going to happen. But as I did mention, we will see our characters, we will see our characters get introduced to other characters of the community. So there's going to be a lot of stuff going on at that moment, because like I say, Rick don't trust them, Rick and his group don't trust them, so going to be a lot of trust issues going on in this episode. Now let's talk about Joe's gun, Joe's black pistol that we saw Rick hide in episode 11 titled The Distance. We saw him hide that pistol in a blender by an empty trailer. Now, I take back what I said in my review. That definitely was some foreshadowing, just like what Rick did at tournaments when he had took the guns and put them in a bag and buried them outside of tournaments just in case something goes wrong, he can go back and get the guns. He did the same thing with Joe's black pistol. Now, let me describe this a little bit. If you're a comic book reader, or if you're not, I'm going to tell you anyway. In a comic book, once Rick and his group make it to the Alexandria safety zone, I said this before, Douglas end up taking their guns from him, because as I stated for this episode, Aaron did tell him he needed their guns when they had made it into the community gates. Now, in the comic book, Douglas ends up taking their guns. And also to note for the comic books, Rick doesn't have a favorite weapon in the comic book. He doesn't have a revolver in the comic book. He never even used a revolver in the comic book. In the TV show, his revolver is his favorite weapon. He doesn't have a revolver in the comic book. He has a black pistol. You can't tell because the comic book is black and white. But he has a pistol. Matter of fact, the same pistol that we saw him hide in the blender, that's for Joe, is the same pistol that he has in the comic book. Now, the situation is going to be different this time. Once he get there, I'm pretty sure that Deanna is going to take all their weapons away. And just like in the comic books, once Morgan had took their weapons, once Douglas had took all their weapons away, Rick was real weary about the place, and he was trying his best to get their weapons back in the comic book. So we end up sending Glenn to get the weapons back. But see, it's different this time, because remember, as I just stated, Rick hid that pistol outside of the Alexandria safety zone. So if something goes wrong now, I do believe, I predict and I speculate that Rick will, him and Carl will end up leaving or deciding to leave out the Alexandria safety zone or lie to the people that's over and say, hey, look, we have to go out and go look for something. I believe that Rick's going to use that excuse or that decoy, anything's going to happen, to leave the Alexandria safety zone to go all the way back to that empty trailer and dig in that blender and get that gun again, because Douglas or Deanna, that's the TV show now, has taken their weapons now, and they don't have no choice to get them back. So now Rick is going to go back to the trailer and get the pistol back, since he don't have no other weapons to use. And I think Rick Revolver don't have any bullets at this time, because he used all 6 of those bullets up in the woods in episode 12, and he was shooting those zombies. So I do see him, again, like I said, in the comic book, Rick has the same pistol that we see him put in the blender. Except Douglas take it in the comic book. See, the pistol is still into fruition in the TV show, except it's different. Like I said, in the comic book, Douglas take his pistol. He take all their weapons. And Glenn have to go sneak them back. This time, Glenn don't have to go do that. If Deanna take their weapons, Rick already remembered that he put a pistol outside of the Alexandria safety zone. So he's just gonna go out there with Carl and get it. And if you don't believe me, I'm gonna put pictures up, because they had a filming session of The Walking Dead, and you can see how they was filming that scene with Rick going back to the same trailer that he had put the gun at, except they got a zombie there this time. And also, I believe in this episode, or it could be next episode, that Rick will end up shaving his beard and he's going to look completely clean, just like he looked in season 1. So the pistol thing with Rick going back to the trailer to get it could happen in this episode, or it could happen in the next episode. So that's my prediction for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I do think they might throw a party once Rick and his group get there, because they're going to be happy. We have new visitors now. They might throw a party. And like I said, it's going to be a lot of untrustworthy stuff going on with Rick's group. So they're going to just look at everybody like crazy. Like, how are these people functioning like this? Functioning so happy within this dying civilization? Do they know what's outside of the wall? Why is these people so happy? So it's going to scare Rick and his group at first, because they're going to see all this good activity going on, because they haven't seen this going in a long time. So it's my prediction for this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. God bless and peace. And one more last thing that I forgot to mention for my prediction speculations. Now, if Rick goes back and get that gun, which he will, because like I said, he's going to go back and get the black pistol and bring it back to Alexandria safety zone. If he goes back and get that, his goal is not to let nobody know that he has the gun. But I think, and like I said, I think this episode will set up a conflict between him and a Alexandria safety zone person, or a person that lives in the Alexandria safety zone, just like it happened in the comic book. I think once he get back to the refugee camp, I think that him with the pistol, because remember, Rick is hot-headed. He hasn't really wrapped his head around things yet. He's still adjusting, adapting to that new place. So he don't know any of those people yet. So I think he will get into a conflict with one of the members there. And I think by him getting into that conflict, and by him only knowing how to survive a certain way, and it's only dealing with violence, I think Rick will get very heated and pull a gun out on that person. And therefore by him pulling that gun out, he's going to start a conflict probably for episode 13 all the way into episode 14. I think it's going to drag out, but this episode could possibly start a conflict, or he could start that conflict with that character like he did in the comic book, either the next episode or episode 14, and it can drag on to the season finale. Like I said, Rick is hot-headed, and like I said, he don't want nobody to know he got that gun. He goes back and get that gun and bring it back to the community. But once he get back to the community, something's going to make him mad, and he's going to just lose his temper. He's going to pull a gun out not thinking that I didn't want nobody to know about it. I had this gun, and then the whole community is going to know then that this guy has a gun in the community. So it's going to be a lot of stuff going on. So again, have a blessed day. God bless you, and peace.